Yes, thank you. And I'm afraid you are leaving us with more questions than answers.
Perhaps I was putting them there so that you can ask me.
Yes, yes. So that's just where I was heading. Sonia, could you please also come up?
Oh.
Okay. Shall we take first 3 questions from the floor? Is there any questions for our speakers? Henriette. Yusuf is bringing the...
My question is to Sonia, still here. Thanks for a very entertaining session. I would have loved to be in your class. My question would just be, when you have team sessions with your students, do you sometimes find that students switch off their mics and they switch off their cameras, and then you don't know what they're doing? Whereas in the in-person class, you can immediately see that guy's not with you. How do you manage that, where the people are connected, but they're not present?
Yes, thank you for that question. It happens very often, and the best management of this I've seen was I recently was a participant in a course with a group of MBA students, and this lady, she was amazing. She just said, "Cameras on," and she waited until people were present. And if somebody wasn't present, she would wait and say class wouldn't start before that person hadn't arrived. Now, this works very well with smaller groups, and believe me, this only happened in the first session. Every session thereafter, people adjusted quickly. Like my esteemed colleague was said, I think it depends on the way you manage your process. If you're clear about the process, if you're clear about what you will accept and what you won't accept, people will follow on. So what I typically ask people to do is, please switch off your camera so we can say hi to each other, so that we can have a chat. And then I say, okay, now you guys are welcome to, switch off. But with different pauses or different periods, I will ask people, please switch on. Every time after a break, we'll switch on, we'll have a quick chat. So I use that as a connection time. So yeah, I manage it. I don't require the cameras to be on all the time, but I do ask for that at certain intervals, and I make sure that everybody understands my process. I also make sure that I engage with students. So I will have a rule, for example, if you're doing group work, every time you give feedback, it has to be a different person. And I will just tell them, it's there so that you can also practice your skills, your presentation skills. And I always say, I feel like I'm on a radio show. Like, that's where my radio DJ came from. I always say, I feel like I'm on a radio show. Let's just chat. And when people relax, they start chatting. And, you just have to manage it and pull in people. If you see somebody isn't engaging, just make a little note and ask them a question. And even if they don't answer, believe me, within 10 minutes, somebody will WhatsApp them and they'll be back in the room. Thank you for that question.
Any other questions from the floor? Oh, great. There we were.
Thank you so much, Tilin. My name is Sivue Bangani. I'm based at the Stellenbosch University. As Prof. Liz Lange, let me just say that thank you first for providing context, because, as librarians, we actually support teaching and learning and research. So we need to really be aware as to what is going on in those spaces, so that we know what we are supporting. My question now is to both Prof. Ochola and to you, Sonia. And it came actually from the presentation by Prof. Liz Lange. As she was talking, I was thinking about, having read about, this, leading to privatization of higher education. And fortunately, she actually touched on that. But I would like to also hear your views on that, to say, is there a danger, that this use of digital systems and reliance on these private companies will actually accelerate, the pace of privatization? My second question, I think it goes to you, Prof. Chola. In terms of disaster management, I can't remember, I was an undergrad quite a long time ago, but I don't remember having heard anything about disaster management, during that time. So I'm just wondering if now, it's part of the curriculum of library schools. If not, are you planning to have maybe a framework kind of integrated into the curriculum, or, getting it integrated into the curriculum of library schools? Now wearing my student hat, I would like to just, comment to say, I agree that, in terms of the research processes and protocols, we need to really revise them. My experience when I applied for not ethical clearance, but for permission to interview staff in one university, I was actually asked to sign and form and, all sorts of things. And I thought, it wasn't in line with what is going on now. That is just a comment, but the two were questions. Thank you.
Okay, shall Professor Lange?
The first question I would like to leave to the DVC to respond to. The second question I will respond to. Yeah, that is a more global question which can be clarified by a person in that capacity. The second question is that in our universities and library schools, we teach records management, and some call them archives and records management in many LI schools in Africa and also in South Africa. Even in my university, we have a module or a course called records management. It's taught, it's a long module, and I've seen it appear in many other curriculum. It's in that module where disaster management is normally taught. But I think disaster management can also be, under these circumstances, it should also be part of continuous professional development, if at all it is not attended to in those institutions. So it is there in the curriculum. I don't think the emphasis was put on it that much before, because we hardly thought that these disasters will be just close to our doorsteps. But I think that during COVID and after COVID, during COVID, at least experience from my own university, I think it has been, that unit has been emphasized than it was before. Yeah.
So just my 2 cents, just from my own perspective, private institutions, I think what we'll have to keep on doing is focus on our brand and our reputation as researchers. I think that is what we are selling, so to speak, at universities. There's a lot of good online content out there, and I think we are making a mistake if we think that the way that we provide content is unique. But I think that what we need to do is we need to build our brand, get ourselves out there. I know we're not salespersons by nature, but that's why I'm here wearing a yellow suit today, so that you can see me. So I think we need to be aware of the value of our branding, but it has to be strong and it has to be supported by excellent research. So we have to get our names out there, we have to get our publications out there, and then I think the students will keep on coming. So that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, I have to read the questions that came in from the virtual delegates, and it is to Sonia as well. Hello, Sonia. Thank you for the awesome presentation. I just want to find out if you have students from deep rural areas where there's connection problems and sometimes no electricity at all. If you do have those kind of students, how to reach them during your virtual classes?
Thank you for that question. So what we have done, before we started working, providing data packages and laptops, we actually started teaching on a WhatsApp platform. Believe it or not. So so students, even if they went offline, they could come back on, they would pose us questions and we would literally answer them. Then I noticed I can put my WhatsApp on my screen. So I'm sure all of you know this by now, but we actually used WhatsApp very well because students can come off and come off and on again all the time, and they could see the feed. So that's what we used. I know it sounds primitive, and I didn't know how we could teach that way, but we managed it. Also, recordings. So when we did our Excel training, which something that was always done live, sitting with students, we couldn't do that anymore. So we had recordings, and the students actually loved it because, again, they can watch it over and over again, but they can actually see the teacher when they come to class. So yes, there's a lot of disruptions, and it is a problem. But I think where students are hungry to learn, they somehow make a plan. I've had students that says, listen, I'm going to be out for an hour. I'm traveling to somewhere where I can get connectivity. So I think if students really want to engage and they want to learn, and that's my experience, from students who've never had this opportunity, then it's amazing. People are resilient and they make a plan.
Okay, then there's a second virtual question. It seems, and then one, a critical account shouldn't prevent 2 systemic considerations of the digital in teaching and learning. Could the speakers respond to how to address both these aspects?
Sonia, you want to take it?
Maybe we can ask our lady, the virtual lady. This seems like a very academic question to me. I'm still trying to process it.
Professor Lange?
Thank you for the question. I think that nothing prevents us from using technology in a critical way. First of all, I think it is important to understand that technology does not provide a pedagogy, so it has to be the other way around. First, you have a pedagogy, and then you look for a technology that can enable what it is that you are trying to do. The other point which I think it is important is to understand what the limits of technology are in terms of accessing people and actually providing access to an experience of education that it is worthwhile. I mean, we also have students to whom we provided computers and data during COVID, but that does not result in a suitable educational experience. So I think that we need to try and bring together the infrastructure that needs to be developed in order to support the technology, and thinking pedagogically instead of technologically about teaching and learning. But we need to harness these things that are there to be used, and it is important that we use them. So thank you very much for the question again.
Sure. Ellen, another question?
Thank you very much. Ellen Thijs, Stellenbosch University. This is to address to Professor Lange. One of the things that we have all learned around the world, and what the pandemic and COVID-19 had highlighted, was, of course, around the inequalities that we have in the whole world. And listening to you, so there's sort of 2 aspects of this, is that I'm just wondering to what extent, in terms of South Africa and higher education's response, not just in teaching of learning, how have we have we actually really taken that in consideration? Because it appears from the experience that I had that universities have always been competitive, but it seems to me when we were faced with the situation that we found ourselves, that it even got worse. We heard so much about collaboration because, of course, all universities had to make sure that they wanted to complete the academic year and so on. And I would have thought things like open educational resources would have actually really have taken off. But it seems that each of the institutions were just focusing so much on what they have to do. Yes, there was, of course, nationally the approach in terms of providing data, infrastructure, helping students, dealing with mental health issues. But to what extent, and I want to link that to, if I understood you correctly, and maybe you can elaborate more on that in terms of the abnormal and the normal, if you're suggesting that instead of talking about the new normal, that we should actually look at as an abnormal situation. And I remember during apartheid in South Africa, when there was a lot of talk, you can't have normal sport in an abnormal society. And I'm starting, I mean, that was a major part of what you dealt with, but just to understand that in terms of when we look at the future or even a post-COVID-19 situation, are we actually going to come out as stronger in terms of really working together and having the same goals and not to compete with one another and just looking at ourselves and not really trying to see how can we really change the whole education system in the country and working together towards that and not just what we need to do in terms of our own plans at each of our institutions?
So thank you very much for the question. I wish I could answer in the way in which you would like me to. I think that there have been some levels of collaboration in terms of sharing of information more than anything else. Certainly, all the TBCs teaching and learning of the country have been in contact throughout this period. Sharing information, difficulties, checking with each other in terms of what did you try, what did you do, etc. There is not sufficient practice of working and thinking together as institutions and as a sector in the country. And of course, there is a competition for resources. And personally, I do not think that this is going to get better because the resources are becoming more scarce. So I think that it is a serious challenge that we have. Definitely in terms of regional cooperation, even we have a long way to go, consortia or not consortia. So I'm afraid that it would be a great opportunity to do things better and to collaborate in a greater way. Specifically in relation to open resources, I think that one of the problems is that there are not sufficient of a culture of open resources at our universities to share sufficiently for educational purposes. And I think that this is something in which all libraries can help us work. Certainly the UCT libraries are helping us working in that direction. And I assume that this is true for other library systems. So thank you for the question.
Professor Ochola, you also want to comment?
I think the last comment by Professor Lange is correct. I think it's something that libraries can take on board. Open teaching resources, for instance. And I think they probably would do it. Some years back we used to have libraries where they keep teaching materials in one corner of the library, physical ones. And I think those resources are available out there. And it's an area that libraries can venture into, academic libraries. And I think they would be even more competent to put it up and for our universities.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have another question from the floor. Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Jeremiah Peterson from Stellenbosch University Library. My question is for Prof. Ochola, and I suppose anyone could weigh in on this. So you spoke about the changing or re-evaluation of research methods and so forth. And so I want to ask, you also mentioned ethnographic studies. So I wanted to know from you, do you see, especially if the pandemic lasts for a year or two longer, that there would be a denigration in research in disciplines that specifically and particularly make use of qualitative methods like ethnographic studies?
Yes, I do. I have students I'm supervising. They're not doing ethnographic studies, but they're doing a PhD in qualitative studies. And I already see that problem, that they cannot be able to, some of them that I thought I would graduate before I retire next year will have to sit out another year or two because of the problems of getting data from the ground. You see these restrictions, close, open, like I was saying, level 1, level 2, level 3, it brings a lot of uncertainty. And in KwaZulu-Natal, things became much worse when we had this looting and Gauteng, for instance. So there's a situation where they could not even be able to go back to those same areas because of the problem that occurred. So I think studies like ethnographic studies will, especially in human social science, some areas, desk research is good. Desk research can do easily. In fact, it's thriving. Most of the work I've been doing lately more desk research and using the virtual data collection methods, but qualitative data collection methods. But where you have to go and interact with the people in the field and collect your data from there, like ethnographic studies, for instance, is going to suffer. And we have to, that's where the policy comes in, including the ethics policy. We have to, and I should admit, our institutions are moving very fast. These days, a lot more listening than complaining. And so I think those are areas that we need to review, and in order for us to be able to reach that group of researchers and group of participants in research. So those areas might suffer for a while. I don't know how long they're going to suffer, but they might suffer for a while. And that is why you need to probably go back to methodologies, and normally you have to go to ethics again to see if it's acceptable to change your direction. Like some of our committees in universities sit after 3 months or 1 month, and time's going. And so a rapid reaction to those things would be very, very essential. I must say that I'm really appreciating the way the reaction now is university management to things are now is very, very fast. And not only management, staff and students react to things much faster than it was before because of COVID. We are still wearing masks until now, and nobody even telling us not to put them off. Keeping social distancing. Nobody will tell you that, and you'd actually question those things. But now it's become like life and death. And so you have to make a choice. And that choice has been made our institutions as well.
Okay, we have another online virtual question from a virtual delegate. I don't know if we have the whole question on the system, but I'm going to read it as I see it, and perhaps you will understand. So it says, Professor Lange said that system literacies deal with a world that... Okay. The system, I must actually put off my glasses also. Professor Lange said that system literacies deal with a world that is not only computationally comprehensible, but could she give an example how we could manage such literacies in our current online? And there it stops. I mean, I suppose it's just our current online environment. Professor Lange, is that fine? You want me to read it again?
No.
Okay.
No, I understand the question. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Evidently, you were paying attention to what I was saying, and got the accent and all. So the literacy that I'm talking about is literacy about technologies. So the whole point of the reflection is to say that in order to be able to use technologies, and this is not just about online technologies, this is in terms of using any type of technology, in terms of data, in terms of the management of sort of large data sets, etc. What we need to understand is how things are built, how they come about, what are the consequences of the use, and what are the logics that inform that type of use. And that is what in Bridle's view, which is the author I'm quoting in my presentation, allow us to function within technology without just being a clog that doesn't understand what is happening or the role that technology has, but allow us to use with understanding instead of use with a sort of sense of, I'm using this and I actually do not understand how this thing works. I hope that that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there's another question from Sibiwe. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have to be careful so that I don't appear to not be paying attention, Prof. The question is directed to you. My question is on you talked about, being no business hours, etc., etc. That is working from home, basically, people just doing as they please, basically, and also, I would say, overworking themselves. So are you in the future, perhaps as a university, looking at having policies in place to accommodate the issue of work from home? Because I would imagine that, no institution had, such policies before. Perhaps to Sonia again, maybe if you can just share with us as to what are some of, let's say we get to the post-COVID world, if there will be such a world in future, then what are some of the aspects of your teaching, that you are doing now that you will take, forward, at that time?
Thank you. Can I respond?
I think that Professor
Lange?
Lange can answer first, the first question.
Sure. Thank you. Look, definitely the world of work and the manner in which we work has changed forever. And at the University of Cape Town, we are working on a hybrid working model that will allow for sort of virtual spaces and physical attendance to work, depending on a number of elements. I, again, think that all of these things are very nice and interesting, but we need to be, again, careful and reflective in terms of what we are doing. There was a very, very interesting article in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about increased productivity with the staff working from home, but at the same time, a much lower sense of innovation and new ideas coming through, because you build ideas through interaction, through having a coffee with somebody, through, talking nonsense and suddenly stumble on a good idea. So at the university, we are trying to balance all those things. So let's see whether the experiment works. So thank you for the question.
Interesting. Thank you. Sonia.
Yeah, just from my perspective, so we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago at the business school, Stellenbosch University Business School, exactly about this this matter, and people were given the opportunity to share their experiences and coping mechanisms. And some of the things that came out there were things like taking accountability for your own mental health. We each know what the way of working is that we prefer. Some of us work long hours, then take a long break. Some of us work, if you follow the Pomodoro technique, which is one of the things that I love to do, the Pomodoro 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break. So I extend that to 50 minutes, 10-minute break, 50 minutes, 10-minute break. That's one thing that came up. Also having a stopping time. At the beginning of the day, decide what is going to be my stopping time. Even if it's 7 o'clock tonight, that'll be my hard stopping line. And also people are sharing things like, if you are working over the weekend, set your emails so that they only go out or are only delivered on Monday morning. So things like that, having common courtesy, respecting other people's time and off time, and also respecting your own time. So I think policy is one thing, and it's wonderful and that should be there, but there's also the manner of knowing yourself and taking accountability and responsibility for the way that you work. So thank you, that's what I would suggest.
There's also the question from Sue about your students and which of your teaching techniques you will take forward in the post-COVID era.
Yeah, that is an interesting question we are facing now. I'm now designing a course for next year, and we don't know what the mode of delivery will be. We don't know if we'll be in class. We think that we might be in class. Sometimes some of our students might come back, others might not come back. So we are now having to cater for everything, almost like sitting here. Some of us will be virtual, some of us will be in person. So the lessons learned, definitely bringing engagement to the class, like those points in the triangle that I discussed. It's very important to make sure that your student is thriving, to be in touch with your student, to have communication, make sure the student is being heard, being listened to. I think that's the most important lesson for us going forward, is making sure that the student feels seen. Bringing that in some way or in different ways into the classroom, and not just focusing on the bells and whistles or even just the content. We tend as lecturers get so hung up on the content, but now it's a people management exercise. So I think that is one of the lessons that we've learned. Being flexible. I just had a research student yesterday saying, I really can't give hand in because my wife has COVID and she's pregnant, things like that, and having the empathy to deal with people's different situations. So I think empathy, listening to students, and making that part of the way you interact, I think that's what I'm taking forward.
Okay, thank you. Time's up. So thank you everybody for the engagement. Thank you so much to our speakers. We really appreciate the time you've put in for being here. Professor Lange for entertaining us virtually and taking us through the examination, and your conclusions and lots of thoughts for the rest of the symposium. We really appreciate that you've been here. You were awesome speakers. Thank you very much. Okay, lunch is now. As we walk out of the hall, as you get outside on the artificial grass, then you turn right and you walk through the, left. You turn left and then you walk through the hotel foyer, and then just right into the restaurant area. Okay, is everybody with me? So out here and then right to the hotel foyer. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.